The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a pale, even glow on the beige walls and plastic chairs. She sat near the window, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly, the other flipping absently through a 2-year-old parenting magazine. Outside, a light rain had started to fall, tapping against the glass in a quiet rhythm that almost matched the steady thump of her own heartbeat. She wasn't nervous, not really. This was her second pregnancy, and she knew the routine by now. Weigh-in, blood pressure check, maybe an ultrasound if they were feeling generous, and then the doctor would listen to the baby's heartbeat. Simple, familiar, safe. She shifted slightly in the chair, trying to find a more comfortable position for her lower back. At 28 weeks along, the extra weight was starting to make everything feel just a little bit heavier. The walk from the car, the climb up the stairs at home, even sitting still for too long. But she didn't mind. Not really, because every kick, every roll, every tiny hiccup she felt inside reminded her that this little life was growing strong. She thought about the nursery they'd just finished painting. Soft yellow walls, a second-hand crib they'd sanded and repainted themselves, tiny socks folded neatly in the dresser drawer. Her husband had stayed up late last week assembling the rocking chair, muttering to himself about confusing instructions, but smiling the whole time. A nurse called her name, and she stood slowly, smoothing her sweater over her bump. "Right this way," the nurse said with a kind smile, holding the door open. The exam room was small but clean, with the usual paper-covered table, a sink, and shelves lined with medical supplies. The nurse took her weight, checked her blood pressure, normal, and drew a small vial of blood for the glucose test she'd been scheduled for. "Dr. Reeves will be in shortly," the nurse said before slipping out and closing the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the table, swinging her legs slightly, waiting. She'd heard mixed things about Dr. Reeves. Some women in her prenatal group said he was very thorough. Others whispered he could be a little cold. But the clinic came highly recommended, and they'd had a good experience with their first child here, so she figured it would be fine. She trusted the process, trusted the system. 15 minutes passed, then 20. She checked her phone, no messages. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming harder against the roof. She rubbed her belly absently, humming a lullaby under her breath. That's when the door opened. Dr. Reeves walked in without knocking. He was tall, with sharp features and thinning gray hair combed neatly to the side. He wore a white coat that looked crisp and expensive, and he carried a tablet in one hand, eyes already scanning the screen as he approached. He didn't look at her right away. "Thompson," he said, more statement than question, still not meeting her eyes. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice calm and polite. "Hi, doctor." He finally glanced up, his expression unreadable. "You're here for your glucose screening results." "I am," she said. "The nurse said you'd go over them with me." He tapped something on his tablet, then sighed, a short, impatient sound. "Your levels came back elevated." She felt her stomach tighten just a little. "Oh, is that serious?" "It's gestational diabetes," he said flatly. "Not uncommon. But it means you'll need to watch your diet closely, monitor your blood sugar, and possibly take insulin if it gets worse." She nodded, trying to absorb the information. "Okay, I understand. Can you tell me more about what that means for the baby? And what I should be eating?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, but not with concern. There was something else in his eyes, a flicker of irritation, maybe even judgment. "Honestly," he said, his voice dropping just slightly, "this is exactly what happens when patients don't follow basic instructions. You were given dietary guidelines at your last visit. Did you even read them?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I did read them," she said carefully, "and I've been trying to follow them. But I'm not sure I understood everything. Some of the portion sizes were confusing, and I wanted to ask—" "You people always overreact," he interrupted, cutting her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Maybe if you followed basic instructions instead of making excuses, we wouldn't be here." The words hit her like a slap. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to shrink, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe. She stared at him, waiting for him to realize what he'd just said, to backtrack, to apologize, to say he didn't mean it that way. But he didn't. He just stood there, arms crossed now, looking at her like she was a problem to be managed, not a person to be cared for. "You people." The phrase echoed in her mind, sharp and ugly. She'd heard it before in school, in stores, in job interviews, but never here. Never in a place where she was supposed to feel safe. Never while carrying her child. She wanted to speak, to tell him how wrong he was, how hurtful that was, but her voice wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, her eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. Not here, not in front of him. She kept her hand on her belly as if shielding her baby from the ugliness in the room. He went on, oblivious or indifferent. "We'll schedule you for a follow-up ultrasound to check the baby's size. Big babies are common with uncontrolled diabetes. You'll need to be more disciplined." He said disciplined like it was a moral failing, like she'd chosen this, like she hadn't been doing her best every single day to give her child a healthy start. She nodded slowly, not because she agreed, but because she needed the moment to gather herself, to breathe, to remember that this wasn't about her worth, it was about his ignorance. "Is there anything else?" he asked, already turning toward the door. "No," she managed to say, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you." He left without another word, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than the rain outside. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the blank wall across from her. Her heart was racing, her palms damp. She thought about walking out right then, grabbing her coat and leaving, never coming back. But she couldn't, not yet. She needed that ultrasound. She needed to know her baby was okay. So she stayed. She took slow, deep breaths, focusing on the life inside her. The tiny kicks, the steady warmth. That was what mattered, not his words, not his assumptions. When the nurse finally came back in to lead her to the ultrasound room, she stood up slowly, smoothing her clothes again. She walked with her head high even though her legs felt shaky. She didn't say a word about what had happened. Not yet. She needed to see her husband first. She needed to be somewhere safe. The ultrasound tech was kind, a woman with warm eyes and a gentle voice who made small talk about the weather and asked if this was her first baby. She smiled and said no, her voice still a little tight. But she relaxed as the cool gel touched her skin and the familiar whooshing sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room. Strong, steady, perfect. She watched the screen, tears finally welling up, but this time they were tears of relief, of love. Her baby was fine, healthy, thriving. Nothing that man had said could change that. After the scan, she dressed slowly, her mind already turning over what to do next. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to cause trouble. But she also knew she couldn't let it go, not just for herself, but for the next woman who walked into that room, scared and vulnerable, hoping for care and getting judgment instead. She gathered her things and walked out to the waiting area. Her husband was still there, sitting in the same chair, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as soon as he saw her, and his expression changed instantly. He knew her too well. He saw the tightness around her eyes, the way she held herself just a little too still. He stood up right away, meeting her halfway. "Hey," he said softly, taking her hand. "Everything okay?" She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since the exam room she felt like she could breathe. She squeezed his hand and gave a small, shaky nod. "Not really," she whispered. "But I'm okay. I'm okay now." He didn't press her in the lobby. He just wrapped an arm around her shoulders and walked her out to the car, holding the umbrella over her head as the rain fell around them. Only when they were inside, the doors closed and the world muffled by the sound of the windshield wipers, did she tell him what happened. She spoke quietly, her voice steady but raw, recounting every word, every look, every second of that awful encounter. He listened without interrupting, his face growing still, his grip on the steering wheel tightening just slightly. When she finished, there was a long silence. Not angry silence, thoughtful, focused silence. Then he reached over and took her hand again. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. "Not one thing," she nodded, tears finally spilling over. He didn't try to fix it right away. He just let her cry, his thumb rubbing slow circles on the back of her hand, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. 15 minutes. That's all it had been since the insult. 15 minutes since her world had tilted on its axis. But in that short time, something had shifted, not just in her, but between them. She wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. Outside, the rain began to ease. A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wet pavement. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and leaned her head against the window. Her baby kicked, strong and sure. She was still scared, still hurt, but she wasn't broken. And she knew with a quiet certainty that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. He'd been waiting in the lobby for nearly 40 minutes, but he didn't mind. He brought his laptop, but mostly he just watched the rain slide down the big glass windows, listening to the soft murmur of voices, the occasional cry of a baby from the pediatric wing down the hall. He liked this time, quiet, unhurried. It gave him space to think. He'd spent the morning in court, arguing a housing discrimination case that had dragged on for months, and his brain felt like it had been wrung out like a dish rag. But here, in this calm, fluorescent-lit room, he could finally breathe. He glanced at his watch. She should have been done by now. The appointment was supposed to take 20 minutes, maybe 30 if they did the ultrasound right after. He wasn't worried, just curious. Maybe they were running behind. Maybe the baby was being extra active and the tech needed more time to get a good image. He smiled at the thought. Their little one had been kicking up a storm all week, especially at night, keeping them both awake with tiny jabs and rolls. "Strong," his wife always said, rubbing her belly with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "Just like you." He looked up when the door to the exam hallway opened. His smile faded the second he saw her. She walked slowly, like every step took effort. Her shoulders were stiff, her eyes fixed on the floor. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her face was pale. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And her hand. Her hand was resting on her belly like she was holding something precious together. His stomach dropped. He stood up fast, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. He met her halfway across the room, his heart already pounding. "Hey," he said softly, taking her elbow gently. "You okay?" She looked up at him then, and he saw it. The hurt, the shock, the quiet fury simmering just beneath the surface. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back hard. "Not really," she whispered. "But I'm okay. I'm okay now." That now told him everything. Something had happened in there. Something bad. He didn't ask questions in the lobby. Not with nurses walking by. Not with other patients glancing over. He just nodded, took her coat from the chair where she'd left it, and helped her into it. Then he held the umbrella over her as they walked to the car, his arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the light drizzle that still clung to the air. Only when they were inside, the doors shut and the world outside muffled by rain and glass, did he turn to her. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and steady. She took a deep breath like she was bracing herself. And then she told him everything, how the doctor had walked in without knocking, how he'd barely looked at her, how he'd said her glucose levels were high, gestational diabetes, and how when she'd asked for clarification he'd snapped at her. How he'd said, "You people always overreact." How he'd acted like she hadn't been trying, like she was lazy or ignorant or careless with her own body and her baby's health. Her voice didn't shake, not really. But it was tight, controlled, the way it got when she was holding back a storm. She repeated his exact words, the tone, the look in his eyes. She described how she'd sat there frozen, hand on her stomach, feeling like she'd been stripped bare in front of someone who was supposed to help her. When she finished, there was silence in the car. Not the heavy kind, just stillness. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer empty reassurances like he didn't mean it or "it'll be fine." He knew better. He knew words like that could cut just as deep as the original insult, especially when they came from someone who should understand. Instead, he reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. He rubbed them gently between his palms until they warmed. "You did nothing wrong," he said, his voice firm, like he was stating a fact as undeniable as gravity. "Not one single thing." She nodded, and this time the tears came. Quiet, steady streams down her cheeks. She didn't sob, just let them fall, her shoulders shaking slightly. He didn't try to stop her. He just held her hand and let her cry, his thumb tracing slow circles on her knuckles. After a few minutes, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater and took a shaky breath. I didn't know what to say. I felt so small. Like I didn't belong there." "You belong everywhere," he said quietly, "especially there. You're carrying a life. You deserve respect. You deserve care, not judgment." She looked out the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "What do we do now?" He didn't answer right away. His mind was already working, sorting facts, recalling policies, weighing options. He'd spent years fighting for people who'd been treated unfairly, who'd been dismissed or ignored because of who they were. He knew how these systems worked, knew how they protected themselves, knew how hard it was to get anyone to listen. But this wasn't just any case. This was his wife, his child, his family. We documented, he said finally. Right now. He pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and turned to her. Tell me again. Exactly what he said, what time it was, how long you were in the room before he came in. Don't worry about sounding perfect. Just tell it like it happened. She hesitated. Is that legal? Absolutely, he said. You're recording your own recollection in your own words right after it happened. That's not just legal, it's smart. It's evidence. She nodded, took another breath, and began speaking into the phone. Her voice was clearer this time, more focused. She described the timeline. Arrived at 1:45. Called back at 2:02. Blood drawn at 2:08. Doctor entered at 2:17. She repeated his words verbatim. You people always overreact. Maybe if you followed basic instructions, we wouldn't be here. She described his tone. Cold, dismissive, like she was a nuisance. She even remembered the way he'd crossed his arms. The slight sneer when he said disciplined. When she finished, he saved the file and labeled it clearly. Clinic incident. Date. Time. Good, he said. Now, do you remember anyone else who might have heard? Was the door open? Was there a nurse nearby? She thought for a moment. The nurse who took my blood, she left right before he came in. But the woman in the chair across from the exam room? She was waiting too. I saw her when I walked out. She looked at me like she knew something was wrong. He made a mental note. A witness, even a passive one, could be powerful. He started the car but didn't pull out of the parking spot yet. Do you want to go home? Or do you want to handle this now? She looked at him surprised. Now? 15 minutes, he said. That's all it's been since it happened. The memory is fresh. The staff are still here. The administrator is probably in her office. If we wait, things get fuzzy. People forget. Stories change. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands in her lap. He could see the conflict in her, the exhaustion warring with the need for justice, the fear of confrontation battling the anger she'd swallowed in that exam room. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. Okay, she said. Let's do it. He nodded, proud of her. Not for being brave in a loud way, but for choosing to speak up even when it would have been easier to stay silent. He drove them back to the clinic, parking in the same spot. This time when they walked in, he held her hand tightly. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile. Back so soon? We need to speak with the clinic administrator, he said, his voice calm but firm. Is she available? The receptionist blinked, taken aback by the directness. I think so. Let me check. She made a quick call, then gestured toward a small office down the hall. Ms. Patel will see you in 5 minutes. They sat in 2 chairs just outside the office, not speaking. He could feel her tension, the way her leg bounced slightly. He squeezed her hand again. You don't have to say anything, he told her. I'll do the talking. You just sit with me. She nodded, grateful. 5 minutes later, a woman in a navy blue blazer stepped out. I'm Priya Patel, the clinic administrator. How can I help you? He stood, shook her hand. Thank you for seeing us on short notice. My wife and I just had an appointment with Dr. Reeves, and we need to report a serious concern regarding his conduct. Ms. Patel's expression shifted instantly. Professional, alert. Of course. Please come in. The office was small but tidy, with framed certificates on the wall and a potted plant in the corner. She offered them water, which they declined, and sat behind her desk, hands folded. He didn't waste time. He laid it out clearly. The timeline, the exact words used, the impact on his wife. A pregnant patient seeking care, not judgment. He played the voice memo. Her face grew more serious with every sentence. When it ended, she was quiet for a moment. I'm very sorry you experienced this, she said sincerely. Dr. Reeves is a respected physician here, but that doesn't excuse unprofessional behavior. He didn't just sound unprofessional, he said gently. He made a racially charged comment. You people, that's not just rude. It's discriminatory, and it happened in a medical setting where my wife should feel safe. Ms. Patel nodded slowly. I understand. We take all complaints seriously, especially those involving bias or discrimination. I'll need to speak with Dr. Reeves and review our records. I'd appreciate that, he said. And I'd also like a copy of your patient grievance policy and your anti-discrimination policy. If this is something you truly take seriously, those documents should be readily available." She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for someone to say this out loud. "Absolutely," she said, pulling up files on her computer. "I'll print them for you right now." While she did that, he turned to his wife. "Do you feel comfortable staying for the rest of the day? Or would you rather go home and rest?" She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "I'll stay," she said. "I want to see this through." He nodded, then turned back to Ms. Patel. "One more thing. My wife is 28 weeks pregnant. She needs consistent, respectful prenatal care. If Dr. Reeves remains her physician, she will not feel safe returning here. We'd like to be reassigned to another OB immediately." "Of course," Ms. Patel said without hesitation. "We have 3 other OBs on staff. I'll personally ensure your records are transferred, and your next appointment is scheduled with someone you feel comfortable with." He thanked her, but didn't smile. Not yet, words were easy. Actions mattered more. As they left the office, his wife leaned into him slightly. "You didn't yell," she said quietly. "You didn't threaten, you just stood there and told the truth." "That's how you win," he said, not with noise. With clarity. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, letting patches of blue sky show through. They walked to the car slowly, hand in hand. She paused before getting in. "Do you think it'll change anything?" He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the woman he loved, but the mother of his child, strong even when she felt broken. "Maybe not today," he said, "but someone had to say it, and it might help the next person who walks through that door." She nodded, then placed her hand on her belly. Their baby kicked right on cue. She smiled for the first time since the appointment. "Yeah," she said softly. "It might, 15 minutes. That's all it had been since the words cut through the exam room like glass. 15 minutes since she'd stood in that sterile space, hand on her belly, feeling like she'd been reduced to a stereotype instead of seen as a person. And now here they were again, back in the same building, walking down the same hallway, but this time it wasn't her alone. This time he was with her. Not loud, not angry, but steady, like a tree rooted deep in the ground. He didn't rush. He didn't storm in like a movie hero. He just walked with purpose, his shoulders relaxed, but his steps sure, his hand warm around hers. She could feel the quiet strength in him, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. It calmed her. Not because the hurt was gone, it wasn't, but because she wasn't carrying it by herself anymore. The receptionist looked up as they approached the front desk again. Her polite smile faltered slightly, like she sensed something had shifted. "Can I help you?" She asked a little more carefully this time. "We'd like to speak with Dr. Reeves," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And we'd also appreciate it if Ms. Patel, the administrator, could join us." The receptionist blinked. "Oh, I'll let her know." She picked up the phone, whispered something, and within 2 minutes Ms. Patel appeared from her office, her expression professional but concerned. "Everything all right?" "We'd like to speak with Dr. Reeves directly," he repeated. "In your presence, if possible." Ms. Patel hesitated for just a second, long enough to show she understood the weight of the request, then nodded. "Of course. Please wait in consultation room B. I'll bring him in." They walked down the hall again, past the same exam rooms, past the same posters about healthy pregnancies and breastfeeding tips. It felt surreal, like walking back into a dream that had turned sour. But this time she wasn't alone on a paper-covered table. This time she sat in a real chair, across from her husband, in a small room with a round table and 2 extra chairs. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes on the floor. He reached over and squeezed her knee. "You don't have to say anything," he reminded her gently. "Just be here." "Your presence is enough," she nodded, swallowing hard. She wasn't sure she could speak anyway. Her throat still felt tight, like it had been wrapped in gauze. A few minutes later, there was a knock. Ms. Patel entered first, followed by Dr. Reeves. He looked ordinary. That was the strange part. Same crisp white coat, same tired eyes, same air of mild impatience. He didn't look like someone who'd just hurled a racial slur wrapped in medical jargon. He looked like a man who'd had a long day and was ready to go home. But then he saw them, really saw them, and his expression shifted. Not to guilt, not to shame, but to annoyance. Like they were wasting his time. "Is there a problem?" he asked, crossing his arms. Miss Patel closed the door behind them and took a seat. "This is a formal discussion regarding a patient complaint," she said evenly. "Please sit down, doctor." He sat but kept his arms crossed, his knee bouncing slightly. He didn't look at her. He looked only at her husband, like he assumed the man would do the talking, and like he already resented him for it. Her husband didn't rise to the bait. He didn't glare or lean forward aggressively. He just sat back slightly, hands resting on the table, and spoke in a voice so calm it almost sounded gentle. "At 2:17 p.m. today, during my wife's prenatal appointment, you told her, 'You people always overreact. Maybe if you followed basic instructions, we wouldn't be here.'" He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Do you remember saying that?" Dr. Reeves frowned. "I don't recall the exact phrasing," he said stiffly. "But she was questioning the diagnosis. I was explaining the importance of compliance." "Compliance?" her husband repeated, not with anger but with quiet disbelief. "She asked a question about her test results. That's not noncompliance, that's engagement. That's a patient trying to understand her own health." She seemed dramatic, Dr. Reeves muttered, finally glancing at her for the first time since entering the room. His eyes flickered over her belly, then away like he couldn't bear to look at what she carried. "Dramatic?" Her husband's voice didn't rise, but something in it sharpened. "Or just black?" The room went still. Dr. Reeves stiffened. Ms. Patel leaned forward slightly, her pen hovering over her notepad. "I didn't say anything about race," Dr. Reeves said quickly, his voice tighter now. "No," her husband agreed. "You didn't say the word black, but you said you people." And in that context, with her sitting there pregnant, asking a simple question, what else could that possibly mean? He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and played the voice memo. Her voice filled the room, quiet, controlled, but raw. He said, "You people always overreact. Maybe if you followed basic instructions, we wouldn't be here." He said it like I was lazy, like I didn't care about my baby. Dr. Reeves shifted in his seat. His face flushed slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "This isn't just about hurt feelings," her husband continued, lowering the phone but keeping his gaze steady. "This is about patient safety. When a doctor makes a patient feel unwelcome, dismissed, or stereotyped, that patient stops asking questions, stops showing up for appointments, stops trusting the care they're getting. And in pregnancy, that can be dangerous." Ms. Patel nodded slowly. "He's right, doctor. Our clinic policy explicitly prohibits language that could be interpreted as discriminatory or culturally insensitive. And you people, in this context, fall squarely into that category." Dr. Reeves finally uncrossed his arms. He rubbed his temple, looking tired now, not annoyed. "I didn't mean it like that," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Intent doesn't erase impact," her husband said gently. "You might not have meant to hurt her, but you did. And more importantly, you created an environment where she no longer feels safe receiving care from you." There was a long silence. Outside, a bird chirped. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Then Ms. Patel spoke. "Given the seriousness of this complaint, and in alignment with our ethics policy, I'm placing you on administrative review effective immediately. You'll be required to complete mandatory cultural competency and implicit bias training before resuming direct patient care. Additionally, this incident will be documented in your personnel file." Dr. Reeves looked stunned. "Administrative review? For one comment?" "For one comment that reflects a pattern of behavior we cannot tolerate," Ms. Patel said firmly. "We've had feedback before. Not formal complaints, but concerns. This is the moment we act." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Maybe he saw the resolve in her eyes. Maybe he realized how bad this would look if it went further. Either way, he just nodded stiffly. "Fine," her husband didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just turned to Ms. Patel. "We also request that my wife's care be transferred immediately to another OBGYN on staff. Someone she can trust." "Already arranged," Ms. Patel said. "Dr. Chen will take over her case. Her next appointment is scheduled for next Tuesday. All records will be transferred by end of day." "Thank you," he said. Then he turned to Dr. Reeves. Not with hatred, but with something quieter, heavier. "I hope you take this seriously," he said. "Not because of us, but because the next patient who walks in might not have someone to speak up for her, and she might just walk out and never come back." Dr. Reeves didn't answer. He just stood, mumbled something about needing to check on another patient, and left the room. The moment the door closed, her shoulders dropped. Like a weight she hadn't even known she was carrying had finally been lifted. She let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since 2:17 p.m. Ms. Patel turned to her. "I'm truly sorry you went through that. We're committed to doing better." She nodded. "Thank you for listening." They stood to leave. As they walked out, her husband kept his hand on the small of her back, guiding her gently. In the parking lot, the sun had fully broken through the clouds. Puddles glittered on the asphalt. The air smelled fresh, clean, like after a storm. She stopped by the car and just stood there for a moment, breathing. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him, really looked. Saw the quiet strength in his eyes, the love, the protectiveness, but also the exhaustion. He'd carried this for her, but it had cost him too. "I am," she said. "Because of you." He shook his head. "No, because of you. You told me what happened. You came back in. You sat in that room when you didn't have to. That took courage." She smiled faintly. "I just didn't want anyone else to feel like that." He opened the car door for her, helped her in. As he walked around to the driver's side, she watched him. The way he moved with purpose, the way he carried himself not like a warrior, but like a guardian. She thought about all the times he'd stood up for others quietly, persistently, without fanfare. And now he'd done it for her. When he got in, he didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, looking out at the sky. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to think change happened in courtrooms. Big rulings, landmark cases. But sometimes it happens in a little room like that. One person saying, 'This isn't right,' and someone else listening." She reached over and covered his hand with hers. "Today it happened because you knew how to say it, and she knew how to listen." He turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. "We did it together." They drove home in comfortable silence. The radio played softly, a song they both liked. She rested her head against the window, one hand on her belly. Their baby kicked, strong and sure, like a heartbeat echoing in the quiet. When they pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. "You want to talk about it more? Or just rest?" She thought about it. The anger was fading, replaced by something softer, relief, maybe even hope. I just want to sit on the porch for a bit." "Watch the sky," he nodded. "I'll make tea." They walked up the steps together. The wooden planks creaked under their feet, familiar and comforting. She sank into the rocking chair, the one he'd assembled with so much care, and he brought out 2 mugs, steam curling into the cool evening air. For a long time they just sat there, watching the clouds turn pink and gold as the sun dipped lower. No words needed. Just presence. Just peace. Later, as the first stars appeared, she spoke softly. "Do you think he'll really change?" He sipped his tea, thoughtful. Maybe not overnight. But today he saw the cost of his words. "That's a start. And Ms. Patel? She'll make sure it sticks." She nodded, rubbing her belly absently. "I just hope the next woman doesn't have to go through that." He reached over and took her hand again. "Because of what happened today, maybe she won't." She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The rocking chair creaked gently. The night air was cool but not cold. Inside, the house was quiet, waiting for them. And for the first time since that exam room, she felt safe. Not because the world had changed, but because she knew she wasn't alone in it. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The days that followed were quiet but not empty. There was a kind of calm that settled over their home. Not the numb silence that comes after trauma, but the steady hum of healing. She slept better. The baby moved more, as if sensing the shift in the air. And though she still flinched a little every time the clinic's number popped up on her phone, each call brought good news. Her records had been transferred, her new appointment confirmed, her glucose levels stabilizing with the new diet plan Dr. Chen had patiently explained. Dr. Chen was everything the other doctor wasn't. Warm, attentive, unhurried. At their first meeting, she'd looked her in the eye, asked how she was really doing, and listened. Actually listened, when she hesitated before answering. No assumptions, no sighs. Just care, plain and simple. But even as things settled, he couldn't let it go. Not completely. He'd seen the way her hands had trembled that afternoon in the car. He'd heard the quiet crack in her voice when she repeated those words. "You people." He knew that kind of wound didn't just disappear because someone said sorry or got put on probation. So he did what he always did when something felt unfinished. He followed through. One evening, after dinner. while she sat on the couch with her feet up and a book in her lap. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The glow of the screen lit his face as he typed slowly, deliberately. She watched him over the top of her pages. "What are you working on?" she asked. He didn't look up right away. "Filing a report with the state medical board." She sat up a little straighter. "I thought we were done with all that." "We are with the clinic," he said gently. "But this isn't just about one doctor in one office. It's about a pattern, and the medical board needs to know." He explained it simply. The board keeps records of all complaints against licensed physicians. Even if they don't take formal action right away, having a documented history matters. If another patient comes forward, especially if it's the third or fourth time, the board is far more likely to investigate seriously, maybe even revoke a license. "It's not about punishment," he told her, turning to face her now. "It's about prevention. So the next woman doesn't have to walk into that room and feel like she doesn't belong." She thought about that. She thought about the woman in the waiting area, the one who'd looked at her with knowing eyes. Had she stayed silent too? Had she left and never come back, risking her own health because she didn't feel safe? "Okay," she said finally. "Do it." He nodded and went back to typing. The complaint was factual, not emotional. He included the date, time, exact quote, witness context, and a copy of the voice memo. He cited the clinic's own anti-discrimination policy and referenced state laws about patient rights. He didn't call Dr. Reeves a racist. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. He hit submit just before midnight. A confirmation email popped up. He closed the laptop and walked over to the couch sitting beside her. "It's done," he said. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you. For what?" "For not letting it just disappear." He wrapped an arm around her. Some things shouldn't disappear. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Thick, official-looking, with the clinic's logo in the corner. She almost didn't open it, afraid it was a bill or worse, a letter from Dr. Reeves. But he encouraged her to read it. Inside was a formal letter from Ms. Patel, on letterhead, addressed to both of them. It thanked them for their courageous feedback and confirmed that Dr. Reeves had been placed on a 3-month probationary period. During that time, he would undergo mandatory training in cultural humility, implicit bias, and patient communication, led by an outside consultant approved by the state health department. His patient load had been reduced, and all future appointments would be monitored by a senior physician for the next 6 months. But the most surprising part came at the end. "In response to your experience," the letter read, "we are implementing a new clinic-wide policy. All staff will now complete annual anti-bias and trauma-informed care training. Additionally, we are creating a patient advocacy liaison role, someone patients can speak to confidentially if they ever feel disrespected or unsafe during care." She read it twice, then handed it to him, her eyes wide. "They're really doing it," she whispered. He smiled, but it was a tired kind of smile. "Good, it's about time." Then, 2 days after that, something even more unexpected happened. She was folding laundry in the nursery, tiny onesies, soft blankets, the yellow walls glowing in the afternoon light, when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but local. "Hello?" "Hi," a woman's voice said, hesitant. "Is this the woman who had an issue with Dr. Reeves at the clinic last week?" She froze, a baby sock in her hand. "Yes, who's this?" "My name's Lisa," the woman said quickly. "I was in the waiting area that day. I saw you come out, and I knew something was wrong. I've been trying to work up the courage to call." Her heart started beating faster. "It's okay. You can talk to me." Lisa took a shaky breath. "I've been seeing Dr. Reeves for 2 years. My first pregnancy, it was hard. I had preeclampsia. And every time I expressed concern, he'd say things like, 'You're being dramatic,' or 'Women your age always imagine problems.' I thought it was just me, that I was too sensitive." She sat down on the edge of the crib, the sock forgotten. "It wasn't just you. I heard what happened with you," Lisa went on. "And I saw how the administrator reacted. I realized, I'm not crazy." He was dismissive. "And it wasn't just me." She listened as Lisa shared her story, how she'd stopped asking questions, how she'd started dreading appointments, how she'd almost skipped her last ultrasound because she couldn't face another condescending remark. "I want to file a complaint too," Lisa said, her voice firmer now. But I don't know how. I'll help you, she said without hesitation. My husband can walk you through it. He knows the process. They talked for nearly an hour. By the end, Lisa sounded lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Before hanging up, she said, "Thank you for speaking up. If you hadn't, I might have stayed quiet forever." After the call, she sat in the nursery for a long time, staring at the empty crib. She thought about all the women who'd walked through those clinic doors, scared, hopeful, vulnerable, and been met with coldness instead of care. How many had left feeling smaller than when they arrived? How many had suffered in silence, thinking it was their fault? Now, because of one afternoon, one 15-minute window of courage, the silence was breaking. That night, over dinner, she told him about Lisa's call. He listened quietly, stirring his soup. When she finished, he set his spoon down. "That's why it matters," he said simply. "Not just for us, for everyone after," she nodded. "I keep thinking, what if I'd just gone home and cried and never said anything? Lisa would still be doubting herself. The clinic wouldn't be changing its training. Dr. Reeves would still be treating patients like they're a burden." "But you didn't stay silent," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You came back. You sat in that room. You let your voice be heard even when it shook," she smiled faintly. "I had help. You always will." The next step came sooner than they expected. 10 days after the incident, Ms. Patel called. Not to apologize again, but to invite them, both of them, to a special meeting. "The hospital system that owns our clinic is rolling out a new patient equity initiative," she explained. "They've asked us to share real cases that highlight where we failed and how we're fixing it. With your permission, I'd like to present your experience as a catalyst for change. Anonymized, of course, unless you're comfortable being named." She looked at her husband. He raised his eyebrows, surprised but not opposed. "Can we think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Ms. Patel said. "Take your time." That night, they talked it over. Was it worth it? To put themselves out there again? To relive it, even in a controlled setting? "I don't want to be a poster child," she said. "You wouldn't be," he replied. "You'd be a witness. Someone who said this happened and it shouldn't." That's powerful. In the end, she agreed, but only if Lisa could be included too, if she wanted. Ms. Patel was thrilled. The more voices, the stronger the message. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the hospital, not the clinic. Just 5 people. Ms. Patel, a hospital administrator, a trainer from the new equity program, Lisa, and them. No cameras. No audience. Just a circle of chairs and honest conversation. Lisa spoke first, her voice steady now. She talked about feeling dismissed, about doubting her own instincts, about how one woman's courage gave her permission to speak her truth. Then, it was her turn. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just told her story simply, clearly. How she'd gone in for a routine checkup. How she'd asked a question. How she'd been told, "You people always overreact." How she'd sat there, hand on her belly, feeling like she didn't deserve care. When she finished, the room was quiet. The trainer nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said. "Stories like yours are why we're here. Not to shame individuals, but to fix systems that let this happen." Afterward, over coffee, the hospital administrator turned to them. "We're going to require this training for every OB/GYN in the network. And we're creating a patient feedback system that's anonymous but actionable. Real change starts with listening." As they walked out into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun warm on their faces, she felt something shift inside her. Not just relief, but purpose. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice, not in the grand sense. It was about making sure no one else had to feel that small in a place that's supposed to heal you. He opened the car door for her, but before she got in, she turned to him. "You know," she said, "I used to think speaking up was scary." He smiled. "And now?" "Now I think staying quiet is scarier." He nodded, his eyes proud. "Yeah, it is." They drove home as the sky turned gold. The baby kicked once, twice, like a heartbeat keeping time with the road. And for the first time in a long time, she felt not just safe, but strong. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because she'd helped nudge it in the right direction. And that was enough. The morning she went into labor, the sky was clear and soft, the kind of pale blue that only comes in early spring. She woke just before dawn with a steady pressure low in her belly, rhythmic and sure like a quiet drum calling her to attention. She didn't panic. She'd been here before. She woke her husband with a gentle hand on his shoulder and a calm, "It's time." He was up in an instant, no grogginess, just focus. They'd packed the hospital bag weeks ago, practiced the route, talked through every possible scenario. But nothing really prepares you for the real thing. The way your body takes over, the way time stretches and snaps, the way everything else falls away except the life you're about to meet. At the hospital, things moved smoothly. The nurses remembered her from her prenatal visits with Dr. Chen. They greeted her by name, asked how she'd been sleeping, made sure she had everything she needed. No rushing, no cold glances. Just warmth, competence, and quiet respect. Dr. Chen arrived an hour after they did, calm and smiling, her stethoscope draped around her neck like a familiar friend. "Ready to meet your girl?" she asked, checking the monitor, her hands gentle on her belly. She nodded, tears already gathering, not from pain, but from relief. This was how it was supposed to feel, safe, supported, seen. 12 hours later, under the soft glow of the delivery room lights, her daughter was born. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a cry so strong it made everyone in the room laugh through their tears. She held her for the first time, warm, slippery, perfect, and whispered into the tiny ear, "You're here. You're safe. You're loved." Her husband stood beside her, one hand on her back, the other brushing a tear from his cheek. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything: awe, gratitude, quiet pride. In the days that followed, as they settled into the rhythm of newborn life, feedings every 2 hours, diaper changes, the hushed wonder of midnight lullabies, she found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future. Not in a grand, sweeping way, but in small, tender moments, like when she rocked her daughter in the yellow nursery, the same room they'd painted with so much hope months before, and realized the fear that had lived in her chest since that clinic visit was finally gone. Or when she caught her husband staring at their baby with that soft, faraway look, and knew he was thinking the same thing. We protected her, even before she was born. One afternoon, while the baby napped in her bassinet, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket against the cool spring air. He joined her, handing her a fresh mug and sitting beside her on the swing. "You okay?" he asked, not because she looked upset, but because he always checked. She smiled. "Yeah, just thinking about how different this feels," she said, gazing out at the trees swaying in the breeze. "Last time I was nervous, sure, but I never doubted I'd be treated right. This time I carried that fear with me for weeks, like I had to prove I deserved care." He was quiet for a moment. "But you didn't have to prove anything. You just had to be you," she nodded. "And this time, they let me be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds and the distant hum of neighborhood life. Then she said, "I heard from Lisa last week." "Oh yeah?" "She had her baby. A boy, healthy, happy. She said she switched to Dr. Chen, too." He smiled. "Good." She also said she's thinking about joining the hospital's new patient advisory council, the one they started after our meeting. "That's great," he said. "She's got a good voice." "She does," she agreed. "And she's not alone anymore." That was the thing she kept coming back to. Not the anger, not the injustice, but the connection that had grown from it. One moment of cruelty had almost made her shrink. But instead she'd reached out, and others had reached back. Now there was a small but growing circle of women who looked out for each other, who shared doctors, who warned each other about red flags, who reminded each other, "You belong here." A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the State Medical Board. It was brief and formal, but clear. Dr. Reeves's license remained active, but a formal note of concern had been added to his file based on multiple complaints, including theirs. Any future violations could result in suspension or revocation. She read it once, then tucked it into a folder with the clinic's letter and the training policy updates. Not as a trophy, but as a record. Proof that speaking up mattered. She didn't hate Dr. Reeves. She didn't spend time thinking about him at all, really. But she hoped, genuinely. Hoped that he'd done the work. That he'd looked in the mirror and seen not just a busy doctor, but a man whose words had real weight. That he'd learned to see patients not as cases, but as people. Because that was the real victory. Not punishment, but change. One evening, as they sat on the couch with their daughter asleep in her carrier between them, he turned to her and said, "You know, I've been thinking." "Uh-oh," she teased. He laughed softly. "No, seriously. What if we write a little guide for pregnant women, especially women of color, about how to advocate for themselves in medical settings? What to say, what to ask, how to document things if something feels off." She considered it. Like a toolkit? Yeah, simple, practical, not angry, just empowering. She liked that. Not about fear, but about strength. Not about tearing down, but about building up. "We could share it online," she said, "or even print copies for the clinic if they'll allow it." "They will," he said confidently. "Ms. Patel would probably help distribute it." And just like that, an idea took root. Not out of bitterness, but out of care. Out of the desire to turn pain into protection. As the weeks turned into months, life settled into its new rhythm. Their daughter grew, smiling, cooing, grabbing at their fingers with tiny, determined hands. They took walks in the park, introduced her to grandparents, marveled at how fast time moved when you were watching someone discover the world. One sunny afternoon, they visited the clinic for her daughter's 2-month checkup. The same waiting room, but it felt different now, lighter, friendlier. There was a new sign near the front desk. "Your voice matters. Speak up. We're listening." And sitting at a small table in the corner was a woman with a clipboard, the new patient advocacy liaison. She smiled when she saw them. "Back so soon?" "Just for the baby," her husband said, holding up the carrier. The woman peeked in. "Oh, she's beautiful." They chatted for a moment about the weather, about how the new training was going, and then it was their turn. The exam went smoothly. The pediatrician was kind, thorough, and asked them how they were doing, not just the baby. As they left, her husband paused by the front desk. "Can I leave something with you?" he asked, pulling a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. The receptionist nodded. He handed her the first printed copy of their advocacy guide. Simple, clear, filled with phrases like, "Can you explain that again?" And "I'd like to speak with a supervisor." And "I don't feel comfortable with this." At the bottom, in small print, "Inspired by real experiences." Because every patient deserves dignity. The receptionist read it, then looked up at them, her eyes soft. "We'll put these in every new patient folder," she said. "Thank you," her husband said. Outside, the sun was warm on their faces. Their daughter stirred in the carrier, blinking up at the sky. She looked at him, then at their baby, then back at the clinic behind them, the place that had once made her feel small, but now held a piece of their healing. "She'll never have to endure what I did," she whispered. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Not if we keep speaking up, calmly, clearly, and together." And as they walked to the car, the baby gurgling happily in her sleep, she knew it was true. The world wasn't perfect. Bias didn't vanish overnight, but change was possible. One voice, one choice, one 15-minute moment at a time, and that was enough to build a better future on.